Welcome to Screen Hollywood, the home of movie news and entertainment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Gradually, the satire became louder than the story. Every season seemed determined to outdo the previous one. More violence. The show became almost a parody of itself. And suddenly, something clicked. I wasn't getting The Boys vibes anymore. I was getting Watchmen. I think the 1950s gives the writers something much more valuable. It gives them freedom. A lot of people are looking at this series completely the wrong way. They've seen the criticism. They've read the comments. They understand they can't simply recreate The Boys. More importantly, they know audiences won't accept it. A few weeks ago, I released a video called The Boys Season 5, A Complete Disaster. And judging by your comments, a lot of you felt exactly the same way. Not because The Boys suddenly became a terrible television show, but because it forgot what made it great in the first place. The ending felt rushed. Character arcs that had been building for years never received the payoff they deserved. The rivalry between Homelander and Butcher, arguably one of the greatest rivalries in modern television, ended with more disappointment than satisfaction. It was an ending that should have been unforgettable. Instead, it felt strangely empty. Now, ever since finishing that final episode, I've been keeping a very close eye on Vought Rising. I'll be honest, at first I wasn't particularly excited. Spin-offs are notoriously difficult to pull off, especially when they're following one of the biggest superhero television shows ever made. Then, Universal released the first promotional material. I saw the production stills, I watched the teaser, I started reading more about the direction they were taking. And suddenly, something clicked. I wasn't getting The Boys vibes anymore, I was getting Watchmen. And if I'm right, I think a lot of people are looking at this series completely the wrong way. Ever since Vought Rising was announced, I've seen exactly the same comments. No Homelander, no Butcher, no point. The franchise is finished. And honestly, I understand why people feel that way. Let's not pretend those two characters weren't the heart and soul of The Boys. Homelander wasn't just a villain, he became a cultural phenomenon. Every time Anthony Starr appeared on screen, you couldn't take your eyes off him. You never knew whether he was about to smile, cry, or rip someone's head off. That unpredictability made every single scene feel dangerous. Then you had Butcher, the complete opposite. Broken, ruthless, charismatic, a man driven almost entirely by revenge. Whenever those two shared the screen, the atmosphere changed. You knew something explosive was about to happen. Removing characters like that from your universe isn't like replacing members of an ordinary cast. It's like removing Batman and the Joker from Gotham. People naturally assume the magic disappears with them, which means Vought Rising isn't just launching another spin-off. It's trying to convince audiences that this universe can still exist without its two biggest icons. That's an enormous challenge. Maybe the biggest challenge any television spin-off has faced in years. Here's where I think people are making one huge mistake. Everyone keeps asking, can Vought Rising replace Homelander? I actually think that's the wrong question, because it shouldn't even try. If the writers spend the next few years chasing another Homelander, they've already lost. Lightning doesn't strike twice. Characters like Homelander happen once every generation. The same applies to Butcher. You don't recreate those personalities. You create entirely new reasons for people to care. And from everything I've seen so far, I genuinely believe that's exactly what the production team is trying to do. They're not making another season of The Boys. They're making something that feels fundamentally different. That's precisely why I'm becoming more optimistic. There was one particular moment while watching the promotional footage when I stopped thinking about The Boys completely. The lighting, the costumes, the architecture, the atmosphere, the muted colors, the way the camera lingered on certain shots instead of rushing through them. It immediately reminded me of Watchmen. Now, for those of you who haven't seen Watchmen, go and watch it. Seriously. Because I honestly believe it's one of the most misunderstood superhero films ever made. When Zack Snyder released Watchmen back in 2009, audiences didn't quite know what to make of it. People expected another superhero blockbuster. Instead, they got a slow-burning psychological drama, A film about politics, power, government manipulation, war, moral compromise, corporate corruption, sexual violence, the abuse of power, and the terrifying consequences of placing extraordinary people inside an ordinary society. It wasn't interested in making superheroes look cool. It wanted to ask uncomfortable questions about them. The audience simply wasn't ready. Today, people look back at Watchmen very differently. It's become something of a cult classic, not because it changed, because audiences did. And testament to this, the great Hollywood director Christopher Nolan openly stated Watchmen is his favorite superhero film. And I quote, he said, "Watchmen was far ahead of its time." When the boys first arrived, it wasn't successful because people enjoyed watching superheroes explode. That helped, but it wasn't the reason. Season 1 worked because it felt dangerous. Nobody was safe. Nobody was entirely good. Nobody was entirely evil. The superheroes weren't inspirational figures. They were products, manufactured celebrities, corporate assets, political tools. That concept felt fresh. It was clever. It was unpredictable. More importantly, it had something to say. Behind every shocking scene, there was satire. Behind every outrageous moment, there was social commentary. The violence wasn't simply there to shock people. It served the story. That's why the first 3 seasons connected so strongly with audiences. They weren't just entertaining, they were intelligent. And that's a very difficult balance to achieve. This is where my concerns about the later seasons began. Gradually, the satire became louder than the story. Every season seemed determined to outdo the previous one. More violence, more outrageous moments, more shock value, more absurdity. Eventually, the show became almost a parody of itself. Instead of asking, how does this develop our characters? It often felt like the writers were asking, how can we top last week's insanity? That's a dangerous trap. Because once audiences expect constant escalation, you eventually run out of places to go. Shock becomes predictable, and predictable shock stops being shocking. That's exactly why the ending of The Boys felt so unsatisfying to me. Not because the actors failed, not because the production values dropped, because somewhere along the journey, the balance shifted. Style slowly overtook substance. Ironically, that disappointment may become Vought Rising's greatest advantage, because the writers know exactly how fans reacted. They've seen the criticism, they've read the comments, they understand they can't simply recreate The Boys. More importantly, they know audiences won't accept it, which means they're being forced to do something far more interesting. They have to reinvent this universe. And that's where I think everything changes. So, let's talk about what I think is the biggest reason to be optimistic. The setting. At first glance, a lot of people might think moving back to the 1950s is simply a cool aesthetic choice. Vintage cars, sharp suits, classic Americana, old-fashioned Vought propaganda. Sure, that's all going to look fantastic. But I actually think the 1950s gives the writers something much more valuable. It gives them freedom. The Boys was trapped inside modern politics. Every headline, every social media trend, every election, every culture war. The show constantly found itself reacting to the real world. Sometimes that worked brilliantly. Sometimes it became a distraction. Vought Rising doesn't have that problem. The 1950s was one of the most fascinating periods in American history. The Cold War, nuclear paranoia, McCarthyism, corporate expansion, government secrecy, the birth of modern consumerism, patriotism mixed with fear. That's fertile ground for this universe. And let's not forget, this is the era where Vought is becoming an unstoppable corporate machine. That story has barely been explored. We've always seen the finished product. Now we're finally going to see how the monster was created. To me, that's far more interesting than simply watching another superhero team save or destroy the world. One detail that immediately caught my attention was the confirmation that the series revolves around a murder mystery. Now think about that for a second. Not another apocalypse, not another world-ending threat, a murder mystery. That instantly changes the pace of the show. Mysteries force writers to slow down. They force audiences to pay attention. Every conversation matters. Every clue matters. Every relationship matters. The tension comes from uncertainty rather than spectacle. That's a completely different storytelling engine to what we've become used to in The Boys. And honestly, I think that's exactly what this franchise needs. After years of escalating chaos, sometimes pulling things back creates more suspense than turning everything up to 11. If the mystery is well written, the violence becomes a consequence, not the attraction. That's an important distinction. Then we have the two characters carrying this story: Soldier Boy, Stormfront. If you'd asked me 2 years ago whether these two could headline an entire series, I'd probably have hesitated. Not because the actors lack talent, quite the opposite. It's because they spent most of The Boys serving someone else's story. Now, they're finally being given room to breathe. Soldier Boy has always been more interesting than simply being an angry super soldier. Behind the arrogance, there's insecurity, manipulation, a desperate need for approval. He's a relic from another America. That alone opens up fascinating storytelling possibilities. Stormfront is equally compelling, not because she's likable, far from it, but because she represents something deeply unsettling. She understands how ideology can hide behind charm, how power can disguise itself as patriotism, how corporations can package dangerous ideas until they become socially acceptable. That's uncomfortable territory, exactly the sort of territory that made early The Boys so effective. Neither of these characters should be treated as action figures. They should be treated as people capable of doing terrible things. That's where the drama lives. This brings me back to the question I asked at the beginning. Can anyone replace Homelander? No, and they shouldn't try. Because if audiences spend every episode comparing somebody to Anthony Starr, that new character has already failed. The smarter approach is to stop chasing another Homelander entirely. Create tension differently. Create fear differently. Create suspense differently. That's exactly what Watchmen understood. The most frightening people weren't always the strongest. Sometimes they were simply the smartest, or the most patient, or the ones manipulating events from the shadows. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's hidden behind a smile. Sometimes it's sitting in a boardroom instead of floating above a city. If Vought Rising embraces that philosophy, it instantly separates itself from The Boys. One thing I genuinely hope the writers understand is that the audience has grown up alongside this franchise. Many of us started watching The Boys because it felt different. Now, we're looking for something different again. I don't need another season trying to shock me every 5 minutes. I don't need increasingly outrageous scenes simply because they're outrageous. I've already seen that. What I want is tension, atmosphere, consequences, dialogue that reveals character, moments of silence that are just as gripping as moments of violence. The trailer gives me hope that's exactly the direction they're taking. It's darker, more restrained, more cinematic, almost noir in places. If that's representative of the final series, they're making a very smart creative decision. None of this guarantees success, let's be honest. This series has a mountain to climb. The Boys became one of the defining television shows of the last decade. Replacing that isn't easy. Building new fan-favorite characters isn't easy. Winning back disappointed fans isn't easy. Every episode is going to be compared with the original. Every performance will be scrutinized. Every storyline analyzed. That's the pressure that comes with expanding a beloved franchise. But pressure isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes, it forces people to produce their best work. And I honestly think the production team understands what's at stake. They know they can't rely on nostalgia. They know they can't simply repeat old formulas. This show has to justify its own existence. That's exactly what gives me confidence. So, here's my prediction. I don't think Vought Rising is going to feel like another season of The Boys. I think it's going to feel like something much darker, more mature, more psychological, less interested in spectacle, more interested in power, corruption, manipulation, secrets. The birth of one of the most dangerous corporations in comic book history. If that's the direction they're taking, then this isn't really a spin-off at all. It's an origin story for the entire world we've been watching. And that's a much more exciting prospect. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. We've all been disappointed before. But for the first time since finishing The Boys, I'm genuinely optimistic. Not because I expect Vought Rising to replace what came before, but because I think it's finally trying to become something new. Look, I know a lot of fans have already written this show off. After the ending of The Boys, I completely understand why. Trust has to be earned again. The production team knows that. Amazon knows that. The fans certainly know that. But sometimes, the best thing that can happen to a franchise is being forced to reinvent itself. Maybe Vought Rising will fail. Maybe it won't live up to the promise. But if the trailer is anything to go by, if the production stills reflect the finished product, and if those Watchmen vibes I'm getting are intentional, I honestly believe we could be in for one of the biggest surprises in superhero television. One thing is certain, Vought Rising isn't trying to be The Boys, and that's exactly why I'm looking forward to it. What do you think? Have you completely lost faith in this universe after Season 5? Or do you think Vought Rising could surprise us all? I genuinely love to hear your thoughts, so let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Screen Hollywood, and turn on notifications for more honest movie reviews, TV analysis, Hollywood news, production updates, and original editorial discussions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.